The clock on the wall showed 6:47 p.m. when Sophie walked through the heavy glass doors of the Grand Azure for another Friday night shift. Her feet already hurt, and she hadn't even put on her work shoes yet. 3 months of working double shifts had taught her body a new kind of exhaustion, the type that sits deep in your bones and doesn't leave even after a full night's sleep. She tied her hair back in the staff room, checking her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the lockers. 24 years old, and somehow she looked both younger and older than her age. Younger because she still had that hopeful glint in her eyes that refused to die. Older because of the dark circles that no amount of concealer could fully hide. "Big night tonight," her manager called out, poking his head into the room. "We've got the entire restaurant booked for a private event. Tech Billionaire, the one who's always in the news. So please, everyone on their best behavior." Sophie nodded, slipping into her polished black shoes. She'd worked plenty of private events before. They were usually the same. Rich people eating expensive food, talking about money, barely noticing the staff except to snap their fingers for more wine. She grabbed her order pad and headed out to the main dining room. The restaurant had been transformed. White roses on every table. Soft, golden lighting that made everything glow. A string quartet was supposed to play in the corner by the grand piano, providing background music while guests ate their 7-course meal. Sophie had always loved that piano. Sometimes, when she arrived early for her shift and the restaurant was empty, she'd run her fingers across its keys, not quite playing but remembering what it felt like. That was another life, though. A life where she'd been a music student with a future that looked bright and clear. A life before her father's medical bills swallowed their savings, before her mother's small business went under, before Sophie had to choose between her dreams and her family's survival. It wasn't really a choice at all. The guests started arriving at 7. Men in expensive suits that probably cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. Women in designer dresses that shimmered under the lights. They moved through the room like they owned it, because in a way, they did. This was their world. Sophie was just passing through it, carrying trays and refilling water glasses. She was assigned to the main table, right in the center of the room, where the host sat with his closest associates. The billionaire himself was younger than she expected, maybe in his early 40s. He had that specific kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. The kind of person who made decisions worth millions before breakfast and forgot about them by lunch. Sophie did her job the way she always did. Polite smile, attentive but invisible. Memorizing orders without writing them down because it impressed people. Anticipating when someone needed something before they asked. She'd gotten good at reading people, at understanding what they wanted before they said a word. The evening rolled along smoothly. The first course came and went, then the second. The guests talked about stock markets and property investments, about vacation homes and private jets. Sophie heard everything and nothing. It was just noise, after a while, the soundtrack of a world she'd never belonged to. Around 8:30, there was a commotion by the piano. The hired pianist, an older gentleman in a formal tuxedo, suddenly stood up from the bench. His face had gone pale, and he was holding his stomach. Sophie watched as the event coordinator rushed over, concern written all over her face. They spoke in hushed voices, but Sophie was close enough to catch pieces of the conversation. Food poisoning. He needed to leave immediately. The coordinator looked panicked. Music was an essential part of the evening's atmosphere. Without it, the whole carefully planned event would feel incomplete. She glanced around the room desperately, probably running through options in her head. Call another pianist? At this hour? With no notice? Unlikely. Sophie felt a strange pull in her chest when she looked at that empty piano bench. She quickly pushed the feeling away and went back to clearing plates from the main table. This wasn't her concern. She was here to serve food, not to solve problems for people who had every resource in the world at their fingertips. But then she heard her name. Sophie, right? The event coordinator had appeared beside her, slightly out of breath. I need to ask you something, and I know this is completely out of line with your job. Sophie's stomach tightened. Whatever was coming, she already didn't like it. I happened to see your college application in the office a few months ago. The coordinator continued, speaking quickly. You were applying to music school. You play piano? Heat rushed to Sophie's face. She'd forgotten that application was even in her file. She'd filled it out during a moment of weakness, a night when she'd let herself dream about going back to school. She never submitted it. Couldn't afford to. I used to, Sophie said carefully. But that was a long time ago. I don't really. Please. The coordinator interrupted. I'm desperate here. Just some background music. Nothing fancy. You'd be saving the entire event. Sophie wanted to say no. She wanted to explain that she hadn't performed in 6 years. That her hands would shake. That standing up there in her waitress uniform, while all these wealthy people watched, would be humiliating. But before she could form the words, someone else spoke. What's the holdup? The billionaire's voice cut through the room. He'd noticed their conversation and didn't like being kept waiting. Is there a problem? The coordinator jumped slightly. No, sir. Just a small situation with the pianist. But we're handling it. He stood up from his chair, and Sophie felt the weight of his attention shift toward her. Several of his guests turned to look as well, curious about the interruption to their evening. You play? He asked Sophie directly. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her heart was racing now. That awful feeling of being trapped with no good options. I'm working right now, she finally managed. I'm sure you can find someone else. Everyone here paid $10,000 a plate for this evening, he said, not unkindly but with absolute certainty. I think we deserve the entertainment that was promised. It's just a few songs. You can do that. The room had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching. Sophie felt her manager's eyes on her from across the room. She saw the expression on his face, the same one he wore when he talked about how lucky they all were to work at such a prestigious restaurant, how important it was to keep their wealthy clients happy. She looked at the piano. Sitting there in the corner, with its polished black surface, reflecting the golden light. Her hands were trembling. Not from nervousness, but from something else. Something that felt like anger mixed with grief, mixed with a desperate kind of longing she'd tried so hard to bury. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll play. The walk from the table to the piano felt like miles. Every step, she felt the weight of those eyes on her back, judging her, expecting her to fail, probably thinking this would be amusing, watching the waitress fumble through some simple tune before they went back to their important conversations. Sophie reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, her server's apron still tied around her waist. She could walk away. She could refuse. But she knew she wouldn't. Not because of the pressure, not because of her job, but because part of her needed this. Needed to prove something. To them. To herself. To everyone who'd ever made her feel small. She sat down and let her fingers rest on the keys. The smooth ivory felt familiar and foreign at the same time, like running into an old friend you hadn't spoken to in years. Behind her, someone laughed. A quiet, dismissive sound that said everything about what they expected. Sophie took a breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. Sophie's fingers rested on the keys, and for a moment, everything went silent in her mind. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The terrifying kind. The kind where you realize you're standing on the edge of something and there's no going back. Behind her, the conversations had started up again. The clinking of wine glasses. Low laughter. They'd already dismissed her. In their minds, this was just a minor inconvenience. A bit of unexpected entertainment before the main course arrived. The waitress playing piano. How quaint. She could hear whispers. Not even quiet ones. This should be interesting, someone said, the sarcasm thick in their voice. Does she even know how to play? another person asked. Well, it's better than silence, I suppose, a woman added with a laugh. Sophie felt heat crawling up her neck. Her server's apron suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She was acutely aware of how she must look to these people. Hair tied back in a simple ponytail. No makeup except a bit of mascara. Her uniform neat, but obviously worn from too many wash cycles. She didn't belong at this piano. Not in this room. Not in front of these people. Her manager stood near the kitchen doors, arms crossed. His expression was impossible to read. But Sophie knew what he was thinking. Don't mess this up. We need this client. Your job depends on this going well. The billionaire had returned to his seat but was watching her with casual interest, the way someone might watch a street performer. Mildly curious but ready to look away at any moment. His colleagues were still smirking, clearly enjoying the awkwardness of the situation. Sophie wanted to stand up and walk away. She wanted to untie her apron, leave it on the piano bench, and never come back. Let them find their own entertainment. Let them solve their own problems. Why should she perform for people who saw her as nothing more than part of the furniture? But then something else pushed through the humiliation. She'd spent 6 years swallowing her pride. 6 years taking orders and saying, "Yes, sir," and "Right away, ma'am," to people who barely looked at her face. 6 years watching her dreams collect dust while she paid bills and kept her family afloat. She'd made peace with it. Or at least, she'd thought she had. But sitting at this piano, with these people laughing behind her, expecting her to fail, something cracked open inside her chest. They wanted a show? Fine. She'd give them one. Sophie straightened her spine. She flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar stretch. It had been 6 years since she'd performed. But muscle memory is a strange thing. Your body remembers even when your mind tries to forget. She thought about what to play. Something simple would be safe. Maybe a Chopin nocturne. Pleasant background music that wouldn't draw too much attention. That's what they expected. Something forgettable. But Sophie was tired of being forgettable. She chose Rachmaninoff. Prelude in C-sharp minor. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. The kind of piece that separated serious pianists from casual players. The kind of piece that required not just skill but courage. Her old piano teacher had called it the weapon. Not because it was violent, but because it demanded everything from the person playing it. You couldn't hide behind this piece. You either conquered it or it conquered you. Sophie placed her hands in position. She took one deep breath, and then she began. The first notes crashed through the room like thunder. Deep, resonant bass notes that seemed to shake the very walls. Not background music. Not pleasant dinner ambiance. This was music that demanded attention. The conversation stopped. Not gradually, but all at once. Like someone had flipped a switch. Sophie didn't notice. She was somewhere else now. Her fingers flew across the keys, executing the rapid runs and complex chord progressions that made this piece famous. But it wasn't just technical skill. Something else was pouring out of her. 6 years of frustration. 6 years of biting her tongue. 6 years of dreams deferred and opportunities lost. Every note carried weight. The anger she'd felt moments ago transformed into something more powerful. This wasn't just a performance. This was a statement. This was every time someone had treated her like she was invisible. Every time she'd had to smile and nod while being disrespected. Every time she'd questioned whether she'd made the right choice, giving up music. Her hands moved faster, the piece building toward its powerful climax. She could feel sweat on her forehead. Her fingers ached. She didn't care. For the first time in 6 years, she felt fully alive, fully herself. The music swelled. The complicated middle section came and went. Her fingers never hesitated, never stumbled. It was like the past 6 years melted away. She was 18 again, sitting in a practice room at the conservatory, playing for hours because she couldn't imagine doing anything else with her life. But she was also still 24. still wearing a server's apron, still carrying everything she'd lost. And somehow, all of that went into the music. The joy and the grief, the hope and the disappointment, the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. The piece moved into its final section, the haunting, repetitive theme that gave the prelude its dark character. Sophie played it with precision, but also with something more. A kind of defiance, a refusal to disappear. Behind her, the room was completely silent. Not a glass clinked, not a word spoken. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing. The servers stood frozen with trays in their hands. The manager's mouth hung open slightly. Sophie reached the final measures. The music grew softer, more introspective, before ending on a series of deep, resonant chords that seemed to hang in the air long after her fingers left the keys. She held the final position for a moment, hands still resting on the keys, breathing hard. Her heart pounded in her chest. Slowly, reality came back. The golden lights, the white roses, the fancy dresses, and expensive suits. The silence stretched. Sophie couldn't bring herself to turn around. She didn't want to see their faces, didn't want to see their judgment, or their pity, or whatever expression rich people wore when confronted with something unexpected. 1 second passed. Then another. The silence became uncomfortable. Sophie felt her stomach drop. Maybe she'd been too bold. Maybe they'd hated it. Maybe she'd just embarrassed herself in front of 100 wealthy strangers and destroyed any chance of keeping her job. Then someone started clapping. It wasn't polite golf clapping. It was real applause. Loud and genuine. And then another person joined. And another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted. People were standing up from their tables. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. Sophie slowly turned around on the piano bench. What she saw didn't make sense at first. These people, who moments ago had been laughing at her, were on their feet. Some of them had tears in their eyes. The woman who'd made the sarcastic comment earlier was applauding so hard her bracelets jangled. Even the billionaire was standing. His expression had completely changed. The casual amusement was gone. He looked stunned, almost vulnerable. Sophie stood up on shaky legs. She didn't know what to do. Bow? Wave? Run back to the kitchen and hide? She settled for a small nod, her face burning hot. The applause continued. People were pulling out their phones now, probably trying to record something, though the performance was already over. Sophie saw her manager staring at her like he'd never seen her before. Like she'd suddenly become visible, after years of being part of the background. A few guests started approaching the piano. An older woman, in an elegant navy dress, reached her first. "My dear," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That was extraordinary." Sophie opened her mouth to answer, but her throat felt tight. More people were gathering around now, asking questions, offering compliments. Someone pressed a business card into her hand. Then, another. The billionaire was making his way through the crowd toward her. Sophie felt a surge of panic. She didn't want his praise, didn't want his validation. He'd forced her into this situation, made her feel small. The fact that it had turned out well didn't erase that. But when he reached her, he didn't smile or offer congratulations. Instead, he looked uncomfortable, almost uncertain, an expression that probably rarely crossed his face. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the noise. "Where did someone with your talent end up serving tables?" It wasn't the question Sophie expected. And the way he asked it, there was something different in his tone. Not judgment. Something closer to genuine confusion. Maybe even regret. Sophie looked at him directly for the first time that evening. Really looked at him. And she made a decision. She was done being invisible. Done making herself smaller to fit into other people's comfort zones. "I'm here," she said clearly. Because talent doesn't pay medical bills. Because dreams cost money. Because sometimes life gives you choices that aren't really choices at all. The billionaire's face shifted. Something flickered in his eyes that looked almost like recognition, like her words had hit somewhere deep. Before he could respond, the event coordinator appeared, flustered and excited, talking about the rest of the evening's schedule. Guests were returning to their seats. The moment passed, but Sophie knew something had changed. She just wasn't sure what yet. Sophie tried to slip back into her role as a server, but it was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Impossible. The evening had shifted, and she couldn't pretend nothing had happened. As she walked back toward the kitchen, her hands were still trembling. Not from nerves anymore, but from adrenaline. From the rush of doing something she'd thought was lost forever. She'd played, really played, and for those few minutes, she'd been herself again. The self she'd buried under bills and responsibilities, and the daily grind of just surviving. In the kitchen, the other servers stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Sophie," one of them whispered. "That was insane. I didn't know you could play like that." She didn't know what to say. Neither did they, apparently, because after a few awkward seconds, everyone went back to work. But Sophie caught them glancing at her throughout the rest of the evening, like she was different now, like she'd become someone else in the space of one song. The dinner service continued, but it felt surreal. Sophie brought out the main courses, refilled wine glasses, cleared plates. The same tasks she'd done 1,000 times before, but people looked at her differently now. Some guests smiled warmly when she approached their tables. Others wanted to talk, to ask questions about her training, her background. "You have a real gift," an elderly man told her as she set down his dessert. "I've been attending concerts at Carnegie Hall for 40 years. What you played tonight belongs on that stage." Sophie thanked him quietly, not sure how to respond. What could she say? That she used to dream of stages like that? That she'd given up that dream so her father could afford his heart medication? That seemed like too much to share with a stranger, even a kind one. The billionaire didn't speak to her again during dinner, but she felt his eyes on her several times. It made her uncomfortable. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that suggested he was thinking about something, calculating. That's what wealthy people did, she'd learned. They saw opportunities where other people saw obstacles. Around 10 o'clock, as the event was winding down and guests were starting to leave, the event coordinator pulled Sophie aside. "Mr. Chen wants to speak with you before he leaves," she said. "He's waiting in the private lounge." Sophie's first instinct was to say no. She'd done what was asked of her. More than what was asked. She wanted to finish her shift, go home, and process everything that had happened. But the coordinator's expression made it clear this wasn't really a request. The private lounge was at the back of the restaurant. A small room with leather chairs and dim lighting where high-profile guests could have conversations away from prying eyes. Sophie had only been in there once before, to clean after hours. The billionaire was standing by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. He turned when she entered. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know you're still working. I'll be brief." Sophie stood near the door, maintaining her distance. Professional, polite, but not warm. He seemed to notice. A slight smile crossed his face, but it wasn't condescending. It looked almost sad. "I owe you an apology," he said directly. "What I did tonight, putting you on the spot like that, it was wrong. I treated you like an employee who had to perform on command, and that's not acceptable. No matter how the evening turned out, I shouldn't have put you in that position." Sophie hadn't expected that. An apology. From someone who probably never had to apologize for anything. She didn't make it easy for him. "You're right. You shouldn't have." He nodded, accepting it. "I want to explain something, though I'm not offering it as an excuse. When I saw that empty piano bench, something triggered in me. My younger sister was a pianist, incredibly talented. She died when she was 19. Car accident. She never got to pursue her music professionally. Never got to show the world what she could do. His voice caught slightly on the last sentence. Sophie felt her defensive walls crack just a little. When I heard you play tonight, he continued, it was like hearing her again. Not the music itself, but the emotion behind it. The way you poured everything into those notes. That's how she used to play. Like the piano was the only place she could be completely honest. Sophie didn't know what to say. She understood loss. Everyone did. But that didn't change what had happened. I'm sorry about your sister, she said carefully. But that doesn't give you the right to force other people to perform for your grief. He looked at her sharply. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not a mocking laugh. A real one. You're right. You're absolutely right. He shook his head. I'm not used to people being this direct with me. It's refreshing. Uncomfortable, but refreshing. He walked over to one of the leather chairs and sat down, gesturing for Sophie to sit as well. She remained standing. She was still on the clock, still in her uniform. This wasn't a conversation between equals, no matter how much he wanted to pretend it was. Tell me, he said. Why did you stop playing? You mentioned medical bills earlier. But I want to understand the full story. Sophie hesitated. This felt too personal, too raw. But something about the evening, about finally playing again after so long, had broken something open inside her. The words came out before she could stop them. I got accepted to the Manhattan School of Music, she said. Full scholarship based on talent. It was everything I'd worked for since I was 7 years old. But scholarships don't cover living expenses. And then my dad had a heart attack. The medical bills were crushing. My mom's business was struggling. Someone had to step up. So you gave up your dream to take care of your family. It wasn't giving up, Sophie said firmly. It was making a choice. Maybe not the choice I wanted, but the right one. Family comes first. The billionaire was quiet for a moment. What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could do both? Sophie felt her guard go up immediately. I'm not looking for charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering an opportunity. He leaned forward. I run a foundation. It was set up in my sister's name after she died. We provide scholarships to musicians who've had to interrupt their education due to financial hardship. Full tuition, living expenses, everything. Sophie's heart started racing. It sounded too good to be true, which usually meant it was. Why? She asked. Because I played one song at your dinner party? Because you have undeniable talent that's being wasted serving food to people who don't appreciate it. Because my foundation exists to prevent exactly what happened to you. Because I have the resources to help, and you have the potential to do something extraordinary with that help. Sophie wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But 6 years of struggling had taught her to be suspicious of easy answers. What's the catch? She asked. No catch. You'd apply like any other candidate. There's a selection process, a panel that reviews applications. I won't lie, my recommendation would carry weight, but you'd still have to qualify on your own merit. Which, after tonight, I have no doubt, you would. He pulled out his phone and brought up a website. This is the foundation. You can research it yourself. Read about our past recipients. See what they've gone on to do. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just asking you to consider it. Sophie looked at the screen, at the photos of young musicians, at the testimonials and success stories. It looked legitimate. But she'd learned not to trust things just because they looked good on the surface. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take all the time you need. He stood up and pulled a business card from his wallet. This is my direct line. Not my assistant. Me. Call if you have questions or if you decide to apply. Sophie took the card, feeling its weight in her hand. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering. The kind of business card that opened doors. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. If I hadn't been able to play tonight, if I'd sat at that piano and completely embarrassed myself, would you still be offering this?" He considered the question seriously. "Honestly? Probably not. I would have felt guilty about pressuring you, but I wouldn't have known what you were capable of. Sometimes it takes seeing someone's potential to understand what's possible." At least he was honest. Sophie appreciated that. "I have one condition," she said. "If I apply, if I get accepted, I don't want special treatment because you recommended me. I don't want people thinking I got in because a billionaire felt sorry for me or guilty about how he treated me. I want to earn it." He smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Sophie nodded and turned to leave. Her hand was on the doorknob when he spoke again. "Sophie, thank you. For tonight. For the performance. For being honest with me. And for reminding me what passion looks like. I'd forgotten. Thanks for watching." She looked back at him. He seemed smaller somehow. More human. Less like the intimidating figure from earlier in the evening. "Your sister would have wanted you to be kinder," Sophie said quietly. "That's how you honor her memory. Not by forcing people to perform, but by creating spaces where they can choose to." She left before he could respond, closing the door softly behind her. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. By the time Sophie hung up her apron at midnight, she had 7 business cards in her pocket. The foundation director's card. A music producer's card. 3 different people who wanted to discuss opportunities. A journalist who wanted to interview her. And the billionaire's card, which somehow felt heavier than all the others combined. She walked out into the cool New York night, exhausted and overwhelmed and more confused than she'd been in years. This morning, her life had been simple. Hard, but simple. Now everything felt complicated. Sophie pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened her old music school application. The one she'd never submitted. Maybe it was time to dream again. Maybe it was time to believe that life could be more than just surviving. Or maybe this was all just a beautiful disaster waiting to happen. Sophie didn't sleep that night. She lay in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, turning the business cards over and over in her hands. 7 pieces of paper that might change everything, or might mean nothing at all. By the time the sun came up, she still hadn't decided what to do. Part of her wanted to throw the cards away and pretend the whole evening had never happened. Go back to her safe, predictable life, where the worst thing that could happen was a rude customer or a slow tip night. At least that pain was familiar. But another part of her, the part that had come alive at that piano, refused to be quiet anymore. She called her mother at 7 in the morning. "Sophie, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Her mother's voice was thick with sleep and immediate worry. "I'm fine, Mom. Something happened last night. Something big, and I don't know what to do about it." She told her mother everything. The billionaire, the forced performance, the scholarship offer. All of it came tumbling out in a rush of words. Her mother was quiet for a long time after Sophie finished. Too quiet. "Mom? Are you still there?" "I'm here." Her mother's voice sounded strange, tight. "Sophie, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 6 years ago." "Sophie." Sophie sat up in bed. "What do you mean? When you gave up your school acceptance to help us, your father and I, we were grateful. Of course we were. But we also felt terrible. We still do. You sacrificed your dream for us. And we've carried that guilt every single day since." "Mom, you don't have to feel guilty. I made that choice freely. But you shouldn't have had to make it at all," her mother said, her voice breaking slightly. "And if there's a chance now, a real chance for you to go back to music, you have to take it. Not for us. For yourself. You've put your life on hold long enough." Sophie felt tears stinging her eyes. "But what about you guys? Dad's medication. The bills. We're managing," her mother interrupted. "It's not easy. But we're managing. And Sophie, your father and I would rather struggle for the rest of our lives than watch you give up on yourself. You've already given us 6 years. That's enough. More than enough. They watch easy. Rive won. They won. Won. After they hung up, Sophie sat in her quiet apartment for another hour. Then she did something she hadn't done in 6 years. She went online and watched videos of professional pianists performing. Not just any performances, but the kind she used to dream about. Concert halls. Recording studios. Musicians who'd made it. She watched a young woman perform at Carnegie Hall. Watched her fingers dance across the keys with confidence and joy. Watched the audience rise to their feet at the end. And Sophie realized something that hit her like a punch to the chest. She'd been telling herself for 6 years that giving up music was noble, practical, the right thing to do. But underneath all that, she'd been angry, furious. Actually, at the world, at the circumstances, at herself, for not being good enough or smart enough to find a way to do both. That anger had poured out at the piano last night, and people had responded to it. Not despite the anger, but because of it. Because it was real. Sophie pulled out her laptop and opened the Foundation's website. She read every word, looked up past recipients, and found their social media accounts. Sent a few cautious messages asking about their experiences. By noon, 3 of them had responded. All said the same thing. The Foundation was legitimate, life-changing, no strings attached. She looked at the application. It was extensive. Recommendations, video audition, essay about her musical journey, financial documentation. It would take weeks to put together properly. But she'd wasted 6 years already. What was a few more weeks? Sophie started typing. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of her life. She worked her shifts at the restaurant, then came home and worked on the application until 2 or 3 in the morning. The essay alone went through 15 drafts. How do you put 6 years of complicated emotions into 1,000 words? She arranged for video recordings at a local music school that let her use their practice rooms for a small fee. Played the pieces she'd once prepared for her original audition, back when she was 18 and the world felt full of possibility. Her fingers were rusty at first, but muscle memory returned faster than she expected. The hardest part was asking for recommendations. She hadn't stayed in touch with her old music teachers. Why would she? It had hurt too much to maintain those connections when she couldn't pursue music anymore. But she reached out anyway. Sent awkward emails explaining what had happened, why she'd disappeared, why she was coming back now. Expected rejection or silence. Instead, every single teacher responded within days. All of them remembered her. All of them said they'd be honored to write recommendations. One of her former professors even called her. Sophie, I always wondered what happened to you, she said. You were one of the most promising students I'd taught in 20 years. When you didn't show up that fall, I worried something terrible had happened. Something did, Sophie said quietly. Just not the kind of terrible you were probably imagining. Life happens, her professor said gently. But talent like yours doesn't disappear. It's still there. Waiting. I'm glad you're giving it another chance. Sophie submitted her application on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the dinner party. She hit send and immediately felt sick. What if they rejected her? What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if the Billionaire's recommendation actually hurt her chances, because the panel would think she was just someone he felt sorry for? She tried not to think about it. Went back to work, picked up extra shifts, kept her head down, and her expectations low. But word had gotten out about what happened at the dinner party. One of the guests had recorded part of her performance on their phone and posted it online. Not the whole thing, just the final minute. But it was enough. The video went viral. Not in an overwhelming, life-destroying way, but in a steady, spreading way. 10,000 views, then 50,000, then 200,000. People shared it with captions like, "This is what hidden talent looks like." and why we should never judge people by their jobs. Sophie's phone started buzzing constantly. Friend requests from strangers. Messages from people sharing their own stories of deferred dreams. Interview requests from podcasts and local news stations. The restaurant's phone rang off the hook with reservation requests from people who wanted to see the piano waitress. Her manager didn't know whether to be thrilled about the publicity or annoyed about the reservation. Disruption. Sophie hated it. She hadn't played that night to become internet famous. She'd played because she'd been cornered and angry and desperate to prove something. Having that moment packaged and consumed by strangers felt violating, but some of the attention was meaningful. A music teacher from Brooklyn reached out to say Sophie's story had inspired her to restart her own abandoned career. A college student wrote that watching the video had given him the courage to stand up to his parents about his own artistic dreams. Those messages made Sophie think. Maybe her story mattered not because it was special, but because it was common. How many people had given up on their dreams for practical reasons? How many were still carrying that grief around, pretending it didn't hurt? 4 weeks after submitting her application, Sophie received an email from the foundation. Her hands shook so badly, she could barely open it. Dear Sophie, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the final round of consideration. Final round. Not accepted. Not rejected. Somewhere in between. The email explained that she'd need to attend an in-person audition in 2 weeks. Perform for a panel. Interview about her goals and commitment. Standard procedure for all finalists. Sophie called in sick for her shift that night. She couldn't face serving tables while her future hung in the balance. Instead, she went to Central Park and sat by the fountain, watching tourists and street performers and people living their regular lives. A young guy was playing guitar nearby, his case open for tips. He wasn't particularly good, but he was smiling, playing because he loved it, not because anyone forced him to. Sophie walked over and dropped a $20 bill in his case. More than she could afford, but it felt important. Keep playing, she told him. The world needs more music. He grinned. You play? I'm trying to, she said. I'm trying to. The 2 weeks before the audition passed, in a blur of practice and anxiety. Sophie's fingers hurt from playing. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if she froze up? What if the panel was looking for someone younger, someone without a 6-year gap in their training? The night before the audition, the billionaire texted her. She'd given him her number when she submitted the application, though she'd been hesitant about it. Good luck tomorrow. Not that you need it. You've already proven what you're capable of. Just play from your heart, the way you did that night. That's all anyone can ask. Proof. Sophie stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back a simple response. Thank you. For everything. Even the parts that were hard. His reply came almost immediately. The hard parts are usually the ones that matter most. Sophie set her phone down and looked at the piano keyboard app she'd downloaded on her tablet. She'd been using it to practice when she couldn't get to a real piano. A poor substitute, but better than nothing. She pulled up the Rachmaninoff Prelude. The piece that had changed everything. She played through it slowly on the tablet. Not for practice, but for memory. Remembering how it felt to be powerful. To be seen. To matter. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that audition room. She'd sit at the piano, and she'd show them exactly who Sophie Chen was and who she was meant to become. Not the waitress who got forced to play, not the girl who gave up her dreams, but the musician who'd survived, who'd stayed true to herself even when it hurt, and who was finally ready to claim the life she deserved. Whatever happened next, she was already different than she'd been a month ago. Already stronger. Already more herself. And that, Sophie realized, was worth more than any scholarship or opportunity, because she'd remembered the most important thing. She was more than the role she played for other people. She always had been. Now it was time to prove it. The foundation's building was nothing like Sophie expected. She'd imagined something cold and corporate, all glass and steel. Instead, it was an old brownstone in the Upper West Side, with ivy climbing the walls and a bright red door that looked welcoming rather than intimidating. Sophie stood outside for 5 minutes, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd barely slept. Her hands felt clammy. The dress she'd borrowed from a friend suddenly seemed too formal, too much like she was trying too hard. A woman around her mother's age opened the door, smiling warmly. "You must be Sophie. Come in. We're so glad you're here." Inside, the building felt like someone's home. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, photos on the walls of young musicians at various stages of their careers, some performing on famous stages, others in practice rooms or recording studios. All of them looked happy, like they'd found where they belonged. Sophie was led to a waiting area where 3 other candidates sat, all looking equally nervous. A guy about her age kept tapping his foot. A younger girl, maybe 19, stared at her hands. An older woman, probably in her 30s, scrolled through her phone, but Sophie could see her hands shaking. They were all here for the same reason. All carrying their own stories of interrupted dreams and second chances. "Sophie Chen?" A man appeared in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "We're ready for you." The audition room was beautiful. High ceilings, excellent acoustics, and in the center, a gorgeous grand piano that looked like it cost more than Sophie had earned in the past 2 years. 3 people sat behind a long table. 2 women and a man, all around 50 or 60. They had kind faces but serious expressions. This was business. They took their responsibility seriously. "Please, have a seat at the piano," one of the women said. "I'm Dr. Martinez. This is Professor Williams and Miss Okafor. We've reviewed your application and recordings. Very impressive. Today we want to hear you play live and talk with you about your goals." Sophie sat at the piano bench, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it. "We'd like you to play the piece of your choice," Dr. Martinez continued. "Whatever you feel best represents who you are as a musician." Sophie had prepared 3 pieces. Safe choices. Standards that would show her technical skill without taking too many risks. But sitting there, looking at those keys, she realized she didn't want to play it safe anymore. Safe hadn't gotten her here. Honesty had. "I'd like to play the Rachmaninoff Prelude in C-sharp minor," she said. "It's the piece I played the night everything changed for me." The panel members exchanged glances. Professor Williams nodded. "That's a bold choice. Whenever you're ready." Sophie placed her hands on the keys and took a breath. Then she began. This time was different from the dinner party. She wasn't playing from anger or defiance. She was playing from hope, from the fragile, terrifying possibility that her life might actually change, that dreams could come back to life even after you'd buried them. The music filled the room. Sophie lost herself in it, the way she always did when she really played. The complicated runs, the powerful chords, the delicate moments that required absolute control. She poured everything into it. 6 years of loss, a month of possibility, a lifetime of love for this instrument and what it could express. When she finished, the silence felt different than it had at the restaurant. Not awkward or uncertain. Contemplative. Like the panel was really listening, really considering. "Thank you," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "That was remarkable. Can you tell us about your 6-year gap? What happened? And what did you learn during that time?" This was the part Sophie had been dreading, explaining why she'd walked away. But she'd practiced this answer 100 times in her head. "I left music because my family needed me," she began. "My father had a heart attack. Medical bills. You know how it is. Someone had to step up, and I was the logical choice. For a long time, I told myself it was fine, that I'd made peace with it. But I hadn't. I was angry. At the situation. At the world. At myself for not being good enough or smart enough to find another way." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Working as a waitress taught me things I never would have learned in a conservatory: humility, resilience, how to read people, how to stay graceful under pressure, how to find dignity in any situation, even when others don't see it. Those 6 years hurt, but they also made me stronger, made my music deeper, I think, because now I know what it costs to lose something you love. Miss Okafor leaned forward. What makes you think you can succeed this time? What's different now? Sophie considered the question carefully. Honestly, I don't know if I can succeed. But I know I have to try. 6 years ago, I gave up because I thought I had to choose between music and responsibility. Now I understand that taking care of myself, pursuing what I love, that's not selfish. It's necessary. I can't take care of anyone else if I lose myself completely. Professor Williams spoke for the first time. You've received quite a bit of attention online. The video from the restaurant has been viewed over 1 million times now. How do you feel about that? Oh, uncomfortable, Sophie admitted. I didn't play that night to become famous. I played because I was cornered and angry and needed to prove something. Having that moment turn into entertainment for strangers feels weird. But some good has come from it. People have reached out to share their own stories, and I've realized how many of us are walking around carrying these buried dreams, pretending they don't matter anymore. If you're accepted, Dr. Martinez said, what do you hope to achieve? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Sophie had thought about this constantly. Honestly, I don't have some grand plan to become a concert pianist or recording artist. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't. What I want is to become the best musician I can be, and then I want to use that to help others. Teach kids who can't afford private lessons. Work with communities that don't have access to music education, because I know what it feels like to have talent and no way to develop it. I know what it's like to be invisible, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way. The panel asked more questions. Technical things about her training, her practice habits, her musical influences. Sophie answered as honestly as she could, not trying to give them what she thought they wanted to hear, but what was actually true. After 30 minutes, Dr. Martinez stood. Thank you, Sophie. We'll be making our final decisions within the next week. You'll receive an email, either way. Sophie walked out of the building feeling drained but somehow lighter. She'd done her best, said what needed to be said. The rest was out of her hands. She was halfway down the block when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Sophie, this is Rebecca Chen. I'm with the Times. I've been following your story, and I'd love to interview you for a piece I'm writing about working artists and economic inequality. Would you be interested? Sophie almost said no automatically. But then she thought about all those messages from people who'd seen the video. People who felt seen by her story. Can I ask what angle you're taking? Sophie said carefully. I want to write about the reality of artistic careers in America. How talent isn't enough when you're facing poverty or family obligations. How many brilliant artists we lose to economic circumstances. Your story illustrates that perfectly. Okay, Sophie said. But on one condition. This isn't about me being rescued by a wealthy benefactor. This is about systemic problems that affect millions of people. If you want to write about me, you have to write about all of us. Rebecca laughed. I like you already. When can we talk? Over the next week, Sophie did 3 interviews. The Times piece, a podcast about music education, a local news segment. Each time, she redirected the focus from her individual story to the bigger picture. Why did people have to choose between art and survival? Why was music education disappearing from public schools? Why did we treat artists like luxuries instead of necessities? The response surprised her. People cared about these issues more than she'd expected. A music teacher in Detroit started a fundraiser for instruments. A community center in Philadelphia began offering free lessons. Small ripples, but ripples nonetheless. On Friday afternoon, 6 days after her audition, the email arrived. Sophie was at work, on her break in the staff room. She saw the foundation's name in her inbox, and her stomach dropped. She couldn't open it. Not here. Not now. But she also couldn't not open it. Her hands trembled as she clicked. Dear Sophie, we are delighted to inform you that you have been selected as a foundation scholar. She had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. Full scholarship. Living expenses covered. Starting in the fall semester. Everything she'd hoped for, and more. Sophie put her phone down and burst into tears. Not sad tears. Not even purely happy tears. Something more complicated. Relief. Grief for the 6 years lost. Joy for what was coming. Fear about whether she could actually do this. Gratitude that she'd been given another chance. Her manager found her like that, crying in the staff room. Sophie? What happened? Are you okay? She showed him the email through her tears. He read it, then broke into a huge smile. This is incredible. I'm so happy for you. He paused. I'm also going to miss you. You're one of the best servers we've ever had. Sophie laughed through her tears. I'll finish out the month. Give you time to find someone else. That night, Sophie went to the piano bar down the street from her apartment, a place she used to avoid because it hurt too much to hear other people play. The pianist there was good, playing jazz standards for the Friday night crowd. During his break, Sophie approached him. Can I play something? Just one song? He looked surprised but gestured to the piano. Sophie sat down and played. Not the Rachmaninoff this time. Something gentler. Chopin's Nocturne, in E-flat major. A piece about beauty and melancholy, and finding peace with both. The bar crowd quieted down. Not completely, but enough. People listened. When she finished, they clapped. Not the overwhelming standing ovation from the restaurant, just normal applause from people who'd enjoyed a few minutes of music. And that felt perfect. Sophie walked home through the warm New York night, feeling like herself for the first time in 6 years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. School would be demanding. Money would still be tight. Balancing everything would be hard, but she was ready. Not because she'd been rescued, or because some viral video had changed her circumstances, but because she'd never actually stopped being a musician. Not really. It had just been waiting inside her, patient and persistent, for the moment when she'd be ready to claim it again. The waitress who'd been forced to play had found her voice, and she wasn't planning to silence it, ever again.